Stanford University.
Welcome to the 4th annual Harry's Last Lecture on a Meaningful Life. I'm Scotty McLennan, Dean for Religious Life, and I welcome you on behalf of all members of the Office for Religious Life. We're honored that Marian Wright Edelman, founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, is this year's Rathbun Visiting Fellow. Following His Holiness the Dalai Lama last year, Secretary George Shultz in 2009, and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in 2008. Mrs. Edelman has been a heroine of mine for 40 years now, and we also share a mentor in former Yale chaplain William Sloane Coffin Jr., to whom she became very close during her years at the Yale Law School. The Harry and Amelia Rathbun Fund for Exploring What Leads to a Meaningful Life was made possible by an endowment established in 2006 by the Foundation for Global Community, which was directed by their son, Richard Rathbun. Its purpose is to help Stanford students engage in self-reflection, moral inquiry, and exploration of life's purpose, especially commitment to the common good. Its centerpiece is the Visiting Fellow program, which brings notable, wise, and experienced people to campus each year. After receiving his undergraduate and master's degree in engineering, Harry Rathbun worked in government and in private industry, developing and manufacturing telephone and radio transmitters. He became vice president of the Colin B. Kennedy Radio Company before returning to Stanford to earn his law degree. As a beloved law professor here then from 1929 to 1959, he also became known university-wide for setting aside his final course lecture in business law to talk about the kinds of values and commitments that would lead students to a meaningful life as a whole. Amelia and Harry were also generous in opening their home weekly to students to discuss ethics and psychology and religion. And they co-founded the Sequoia Seminar here in the Bay Area, which was later known as Creative Initiative, then Beyond War, and finally the Foundation for Global Community. Many board members and participants in the foundation and its predecessor organizations are here this afternoon, and I want especially to greet you and to thank you. The Office for Religious Life is committed in its mission statement to guide, nurture, and enhance spiritual, religious, and ethical life university-wide at Stanford, including engaging ourselves in the sacred duty to repair the world. My associate dean colleagues, Rabbi Patricia Carlin Newman and Reverend Joanne Sanders, direct programs with titles like What Matters to Me and Why, Sports and Spirituality, and the Fellows for Religious Encounter, which are supported by Rathbun funding. The most recent commitment of Rathbun funds has been to assist in partnership with the Haas Center for Public Service and other campus groups in Stanford's response to the challenge that President Obama has issued to colleges and universities nationwide to encourage community service and interfaith engagement. Our theme here is hospitality and welcoming the stranger, looking at immigration in the Bay Area through the lens of hunger and homelessness. Students here today should know that the next introductory session for activities to begin in the winter quarter will take place this Sunday, December 4th, from 5 to 6:30 in the Haas Center. Rabbi Carlin Newman, Reverend Sanders, and I work with a very talented and committed staff to whom we're very grateful, and in particular today to Na-Sun Cho, the Rathbun Program Manager, who's been responsible for planning and organizing this lecture and related activities on campus. And I also want to acknowledge Development Officer Maura McGinnity, who's worked with the foundation from the start to conceptualize this program and has stayed very helpfully involved every step of the way. It's now my pleasure to introduce Craig Ritchie, who had a critical role to play in establishing the Rathbun Fund when he was simultaneously on the boards of the Foundation for Global Community and the Stanford Alumni Association. He's a classmate of Richard Rathbun, who is currently out of the country this year, and has remained Richard's close friend ever since they graduated together in 1966. Mr. Ritchie is currently head of the Palo Alto office of the law firm of Dorsey and Whitney, a partner in its trial group, and a member of the firm's board of directors. It's with great appreciation that I introduce Craig Ritchie.
Thank you, Scotty. Can you all hear this all right? I can. Thank you. My main reason for being here is that my life was tremendously impacted by Harry and Amelia Rathbun in ways that I wouldn't have time to tell you, so I'm delighted to be here sitting in for Richard. It is also my very distinct pleasure to introduce to you Marian Wright Edelman, who I have known by reputation and writing for a long time and had the pleasure of meeting just earlier this afternoon. As Scotty has mentioned, she is the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund and has been leading that organization for 38 years. And as most of you know, it's an advocacy and research center for children's issue, a voice for all children. And I think the most succinct statement about their mission that I have seen says that they champion policies and programs that lift children out of poverty, protect them from abuse and neglect, and ensure their access to health care, quality education, and moral and spiritual foundation. The Children's Defense Fund grew out of Mrs. Edelman's work in the civil rights movement in the 60s and is really a continuation of that for the past 38 years. Her background and accomplishments, as many of you know, are remarkable. Let me just highlight a few of the examples. She did follow her father's advice that says, don't let anything get in the way of your education. And she is a graduate of Spelman College and Yale Law School. And she has achieved many, many firsts. She was the first Black woman admitted to the bar in the state of Mississippi as a lawyer, the first woman elected by the alumni as a member of the Yale University Corporation, I guess the equivalent of our Board of Trustees here at Stanford. She has received nearly 100 honorary degrees. Probably too many to count. I'm sure they're in a drawer somewhere, Miriam, right? Or on the wall. And many, many awards. And let me just highlight a couple of them. The MacArthur Genius Award, Miriam, how does that one sound? She doesn't like this, I don't think, but I think it's important that you know this. The Robert F. Kennedy Lifetime Achievement Award for her writings, which are also too numerous to mention, which I know they're in the library of my home. Kathy referred to them. And the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian freedom award. She also has 3 sons and 4 grandchildren, so she's been in the trenches with children as well, rather than... I think public service has been her calling and her passion, and the statement that's often attributed to her that I like best is, if you don't like the world the way it is, you have an obligation to change it. Just do it one step at a time. Please welcome Marian Wright Edelman.
Thank you very much. I am very honored to be this year's Rathbun Fellow. I wish I had known the Rathbuns, but I'm glad to be here and to learn more about them and their great legacy to this university. And I've had such fun, and I've learned a lot from the many meetings I've held with students over the last 3 days, and so I thank all of you for your hospitality and for your sharing. I think we're living at an incredible, magical, and volatile moment in history. Very few of us are blessed to experience the beginning of both a new century and millennium, and I think that we need to ask how we are going to give thanks for the life and earth and nations and children that God has entrusted to our care. What legacies and values will we stand for and send to the future through our children to their children, and to a spiritually confused, balkanized, and violent world that is desperately hungering for moral leadership and community? How will progress be measured over the next 10, 50, 100, and 1,000 years if we survive them? by the kill power and number of weapons of destructions we can produce, or by our willingness to shrink, indeed destroy the global and national prisons of violence constructed in the name of peace and security. Will our era be remembered by how many material things we can manufacture, advertise, sell, and consume, or by our rediscovery of more lasting non-material measures of success? A new Dow Jones for the quality of life and justice in our families, national and world communities. Will our legacy be how rapidly corporate mergermania and technology and greed can render human beings obsolete, or by our efforts to reach a better balance between corporate profits and corporate caring for children, families, communities, the poor, and the environment? Will we be remembered by how much a few at the top can get at the expense of the many at the bottom and in the middle, or by our determination to close the huge gap between the haves and have-nots in a world where the net worth of the 1,210 richest people exceeds the combined income of almost 2 billion people in the poorest 130 nations? Something is awry in our own nation when the top 25 hedge fund managers made a combined total of over $22 billion in 2010, with the top earner making as much as $4.9 billion, or about $155 per second. The 400 highest paid taxpayers earned as much as the combined tax revenues of 22 states. It is time for us to have everybody pay their fair share for the future. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I quote in almost every speech, the great German Protestant theologian, believed that he died opposing Hitler's Holocaust, as we know, but he believed, and I share that belief, that the test of the morality of a society is how it treats its children. The United States is failing Bonhoeffer's test every day by permitting a child to drop out of school every 9 seconds of the school day, child to be abused and neglected every 42 seconds, to be born into poverty in our still very rich nation every 34 seconds, to be born without health insurance every 42 seconds, and to be killed by guns every 3 hours. We have lost, since we began to document gun violence in children in 1979, over 110,000 children to gunfire in America, more than all the U.S. battle casualties since World War II, and I don't know where our anti-war movement is to protect children against gun violence in America. A majority of all of our children in all racial and income groups cannot read or compute at grade level in 4th, 8th, or 12th grade, and among our Black and Hispanic children, the figure is 80% and plus in 4th, 8th, and 12th grade if they have not already dropped out in 12th grade. What is a child going to do if they don't have an education? They can't read and compute competently in this globalized world. We're sentencing millions of our children to economic and social death. We've got a cradle to prison pipeline, which wakes me up at 3 o'clock every morning, thinking about how do we get here, that puts 1 in 3 Black boys 10 years old today, 1 in 6 Latino boys 10 years old today at risk of imprisonment, and we have got to wake up and see and break up this cradle to prison pipeline, which is the new American apartheid. Incarceration is becoming the new segregation, and we've got to replace that pipeline to prison with a pipeline to college so that children can have hope. And our next generations, rather than moving backwards as they are, will be able to move forward and build a strong America in the future. Now, these facts are not acts of God. They are our choices as human beings, as American citizens. We can and we must change them. And I think it's going to require asking very fundamental questions and examining who we are and what we value. What kind of people do we Americans seek to be in the 21st century? What kind of people do we want our children to be? What kind of choices and sacrifices are we prepared to make to realize a more just, compassionate, and less violent society and world, one safe and fit for every child? 1,000 years ago, the United States was not even a dream. Copernicus and Galileo had not told us the earth was round or that it revolved around the sun. Gutenberg's Bible had not been printed. Wycliffe had not translated it into English. And Martin Luther had not tacked his 95 Theses on the church door. The Magna Carta didn't exist. Chaucer's and Shakespeare's tales had not yet been spun. And the miraculous music of Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and the Negro slaves and the blues and jazz in America had not been created to inspire and soothe our spirits. Many European serfs struggled in bondage while many African and Asian empires flourished in independence. Native Americans peopled America's soil free of slavery's blight. And Hitler's Holocaust had yet to show the depths human evil can reach when good women and men remain silent or indifferent. A decade, 10, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now, will civilization and humankind remain? Will America's dream be alive, be remembered, and be worth remembering? Will the United States be a blip or a beacon in history? Can our founding principle that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights withstand the test of time, the tempest of politics and greed, and become deed and not just creed for every man, woman, and child? Is America's dream big enough and viable enough for every second child who is female, every fifth child who is Latina, every fifth child who is poor, every sixth child who is Black, and every seventh child who is mentally or physically challenged? And is our dream big enough to share with the 2.5 billion people worldwide who continue to live in poverty? I think this moment is another inflection moment in history where a churning new world order is struggling to be born that is affecting every human being on Earth. Changing rules of doing global business are creating important new questions, challenges, and opportunities. Who will gain and who will be left behind? Will the chances of the poor, women, and children at home and around the world be enhanced or exploited? Will powerful corporate interests eviscerate or respect democratic nation-state decision-making processes? Will multinational conglomerates be accountable to or run roughshod over governments, communities, and citizens here at home and abroad in pursuit of quicker and bigger profits? Will the changing nature of work and the demands of the global economy strengthen or weaken already frayed family and community bonds and job security? Will cultural homogenization and corporate branding contribute to or detract from the rich diversity of our nation's and world's people? How can we close the spiraling divides between the rich and the poor? And how can our warring ways be curbed and transformed in a world teetering on the brink of nuclear suicide so that our children can feel safe and hopeful again and trust adults to protect them and their futures? I was struck by a statement of a young girl in Stanford, Connecticut after 9/11. She wrote, "It occurs to me that I might never grow up, and I don't think I'm going to ever trust the sky again." Now, if I could be granted only one wish and pass only one universal law, I would dismantle the arsenals of nuclear and conventional weapons of death in the world, produce no more, and invest the trillions of saved resources in tools of life for the poor, hungry, homeless, sick, and uneducated children and people on God's earth. And I am happy to see that our nation, and with the help of people like Secretary Shultz and Max Kampelman and others, trying to work towards a nuclear-free world, and we must support that. We've got to begin to change course. I look at our defense budget. In fiscal year 2011, it's not just nuclear arsenals, but it's the other. Our Defense Department is scheduled to spend $660 billion. That's $55 billion a month, $12.7 billion a week, $1.8 billion a day, $75.3 million an hour, $26 million a minute, and $20,900 a second. Just 1 second of defense spending is about the same as the annual average salary of a child care worker. I think I'd rather see us invest some of that money and have a more balance between our internal security needs and our external security needs. I just think that I heard Barney Frank last night, who said he thought that we could find a way of reinvesting $200 billion of our defense budget each year without jeopardizing our national security from the outside. And I happen to feel that the greatest threat to our national security comes from inside, and our failure to invest in our own people and our own children. And I hope, again, we can have a robust debate about who we are and what is real national security and what do we value. I've often quoted Dwight Eisenhower, who said a long time ago that every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. And if we could begin to give hope and food and job and some kind of security to the children and people of the world, it's going to do us many more goods, much more good than all of these weapons of death. And I think it is very important that, again, we begin to have a more robust demand about what real defense is and what real security is. The United States has exerted and continues to wield disproportionate global influence as the sole remaining superpower. But our moral authority, economic capacity, and ability to lead will continue to wane unless we get our internal house in order, practice our espoused values of freedom and justice, repair our crumbling economy, make sure that all of our children can get a decent education through our public school systems, and close the gaping gap, the wealth gap and the income gap, which Occupy Wall Street had at least put on our radar screens. And I hope we will use it to transform or to figure out how we can now take this and really begin to see how we can move our nation in a new direction. I think that this is an opportunity that we don't want to lose, and we must begin to prepare our children and country to compete in the years ahead. Now, what do we as citizens do to help our nation regain or maintain its moral authenticity and leadership? I think the most important thing is we've got to be vigilant and continue to tell ourselves, remind ourselves that democracy is not a spectator sport. And we've got to make sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Our history of slavery and racial segregation teaches that just as racial apartheid in an earlier era, after our first bloody civil war, that it can happen again unless we are vigilant and address its reincarnation under new guises. I think incarceration is that dangerous new guide, and the resegregation of our schools and the rearing of all racial disparities, which we've not dealt with, we've got to begin to be mindful. Millions of our children are at risk of a cradle-to-prison pipeline. We're criminalizing children at earlier and earlier ages. We're not preparing them through a high-quality early childhood system, and we know what the science tells us about early brain development, and how do we close that gap between what we know works and what we do for our children. But we've got to have a high-quality early childhood system. We've got to make sure that every child is prepared for school, that every parent is prepared and supported in parenting and learning what they need to know in order to help raise healthy children. Got to make sure that every school is ready for every child. And I've been trying to encourage everybody I can to go into education, because that is the sit-in and the freedom rider movement of this era. We've got to educate our children and give them hope. And we have got to make sure that we close off all these entry points into this cradle-to-prison pipeline from before birth until adulthood. We've got to look at our child welfare system, our juvenile justice system. We have got to challenge zero-tolerance school discipline policies, which are putting children out of school. I've never understood why schools expelled or suspended children for truancy and tardiness. They should find out why they're not coming to school. And we've got to begin to have common sense as adults. Children are being expelled and suspended under zero-tolerance school discipline policies for nonviolent offenses that used to be handled in the principal's office. And I just hope that we can begin to look at all of these and say, how does this reflect what we want to value, and are we making these policies that help or hurt our children? Are we sending them to prison, or are we sending them to college? But please pay attention to this cradle-to-prison pipeline. Our website is full of it, but we would not have it if we had every child having a healthy start and a fair start and a moral start in life, and successful transition to adulthood with the help of caring families and communities. And we have got to begin to reweave the fabric of family, reweave the fabric of community, and make children a central point. And we've got to stop relying on punishment as a first resort. We need a major paradigm change that moves us to a prevention and early intervention to replace punishment. And I can't think of a dumber investment policy than our current one of spending 3 times more per prisoner than for public school pupil. We need a new set of values. The second thing is that all of us must understand that citizens must organize and make leaders lead. A lot of people are waiting for Dr. King or the next charismatic Dr. King to save us. That's not going to be the case. Leaders don't make movements, movements make leaders. The central fact of Dr. King's life, which my role model Ella Baker, who helped found SNCC and nourished us as young leaders, told us that Dr. King realized as early as Montgomery from its beginning into Memphis when he was assassinated, was that the movement made Martin rather than Martin making the movement. Diane Nash, the Nashville, Tennessee student, gifted sit-in leader, told David Garrow that if people think it was Martin Luther King's movement, then today they, young people, are more likely to say, gosh, I wish we had a Martin Luther King here today to lead us. If people knew how that movement started, then the question they would ask themselves, what can I do? And that is the question each of us needs to ask today in light of this unprecedented gap, wealth gap and income gap, which has left so many millions of people behind in our own country and around the world. Dr. King, in his last days, really again warned us with more vigor that citizens must be vigilant and courageous in speaking the truth about our nation's failing. And near the end of his life, he was deeply discouraged about the ability of our economic system as it currently operated to confront the deep structural ills of the racism, excessive materialism, poverty, and militarism he warned could lead to our downfall. And as he struggled to build support for the Poor People's Campaign in his last years to end poverty, for white, Black, Hispanic, and Native American and Asian Americans, always believing that helping the Black poor would help all the poor and all Americans, he confided to friends, and I quote him, that we have fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know we will win. But I've come to believe that we're integrating into a burning house. I'm afraid that America may be losing what moral vision she may have had, and I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we're walking into a place that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. Until we commit ourselves to ensuring that the underclass is given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetuate the anger and violence that tears at the soul of the nation. And when I asked what one should do, he responded, he says, I think we're all going to have to just become firemen. So let's think about that new occupation as citizens in our great country. I hope many of you, and I want to talk more now to young people, will wander off the beaten path and redefine success in 21st century and the third millennial world, asking not how much we can get, but how much can I do without and share. Asking not how can I find myself, but asking more how can I lose myself in service to others. And one of the things I have learned, because I'm now going back to my old speeches, is the importance of repetition. And I realize that Stanford students, I used to think I'd have to have a new speech for every new thing, but I found that the old words and the old values really need to be repeated over and over again until they kind of get through. And so I want to really kind of repeat some of these for the Stanford students today. And it's about my own childhood, and it's about trying to share with my own children. And I wanted to make sure, just in case that they were going out of the house in a very different world, that they really knew what I believed and thought was important, and they knew that they could take it or leave it, but it was important that we say it. But more and more, and the older I get, I go back to the core values of my childhood, which was where service was, as essential part of my upbringing as eating and sleeping and going to school. Carrying Black adults were buffers against the segregated prison of the outside world that told me as a Black girl I wasn't worth much and wasn't important. But I didn't believe it because my parents said it wasn't so, my preachers, one of whom was my daddy, said it wasn't so, and my community elders said it wasn't so. So I internalized a strong childhood message that as God's child, no man or woman could look down on me, and I could look down on no man or woman. Couldn't play in segregated public playgrounds or sit at drugstore lunch counters or have a soda or milkshake at the drugstore counter, so my daddy, a Baptist minister, built a playground and canteen behind our church. Whenever he and my mother saw a need, they tried to respond. And as I've said to the wonderful students I've had a chance to meet this week, that my daddy said God runs a full employment economy, and that if you just open your eyes and ears and follow the need, you'll never lack for a purposeful life. There were no black homes for the aged in my home county, so my parents began one across the street. And all of us children had to go and help out, cooking and cleaning and serving. I didn't like it at the time, but that's how I learned that it was my responsibility to take care of elderly family members and neighbors, and that everyone was my neighbor. Black church and community members were watchful extended parents. They reported on me when I did wrong. They applauded when I did well. And they were very clear, the adults in my childhood, about what doing well meant. It meant being helpful to others. It meant achieving in school and reading. All of my siblings and I realized very early on that the only time Daddy wouldn't give us a chore was when we were reading, so we all read a lot. Children were taught by example that nothing was too lowly to do, and that the work of our heads and hands were both valuable. And I remember as if it were yesterday, as a very young child, 7 or 8 years old, a debate between my mother and father as to whether I was too young to go with an older brother to clean the bed sores of a poor sick woman, and learn just how much I ended up going. That even the smallest helping hand can mean to a person in need. Our families, despite the hostility of the external and rigidly enforced apartheid in my small southern rural South Carolina town in the 40s and 50s, our families and our religious congregation and our community elders made children feel useful and important. And while life was often hard and resources were often scarce, we always knew who we were, and that the measure of our worth was inside our heads and hearts and not outside in personal possessions or personal ambition. I was taught that the world had a lot of problems, that I could struggle and change them, that intellectual and material gifts brought the privilege and responsibility of sharing with those less fortunate, and that service is the rent that each of us pays for living. It's the very purpose of life and not something you do in your spare time or after you've reached your personal goals. I'm so grateful for these childhood legacies of a living faith reflected in daily service, the discipline of hard work, and a capacity to struggle in the face of adversity. People often ask me, how in the world do you keep doing this year after year, and why did you ever choose to do this? I said it never occurred to me not to do it, and it wouldn't occur to me ever to give up, because giving up was not a part of my childhood lexicon. You got up every morning and you did what you had to do, and you got up every time you fell down and tried as many times as you had to until it was done right. My parents and community elders had grit. They valued family life and family rituals and tried to be and expose us to good role models. And role models were of two kinds: those who achieved in the outside world, and also those who didn't have as much formal education or money, but who taught us by the special grace of their lives. Christ's and Tolstoy's and Gandhi's message that the kingdom of God is within. And every day I still try to be half as good as those ordinary people of grace who shared whatever they had with others. I was 14 the night my daddy died, and our nice introduction pointed out that he was very clear, even as he was dying in an ambulance with holes in his shoes, but he had 2 children who'd graduated from college, 1 child in college, another in divinity school, and a vision he was able to convey to me in that ambulance that I, as a young black girl, could be and do anything, that race and gender are shadows, and that character, self-discipline, determination, attitude, and service are the substance of life. I want to convey that same vision to the Stanford students here today, who are struggling to find their footholds in an ethically polluted nation and world where instant sex without responsibility, instant gratification without effort, instant solutions without sacrifice, getting rather than giving, and hoarding rather than sharing are the too frequent signals of our mass media, popular and corporate culture, and political life. The standard for success for too many Americans has become personal greed rather than common good. The standard for striving and achievement has become getting by rather than making an extra effort or service to others. None of that is true at Stanford, but just in case. Truth-telling and moral example have become devalued commodities, and nowhere is that paralysis of private and public conscience more evident than the neglect and abandonment of millions of our children who are struggling to get a foothold in America's dream. And we have got to see them, and we have got to respond. I mean, the ultimate test of a democracy is whether the most vulnerable, voteless, lobbyless constituency can be safe and invested in and treated fairly and given a level playing field in our democracy. The bombs that are poised to blow up America's dream emanate from no enemies without, but they're ticking away within ourselves, in our families, and communities, in our lack communities, and in our moral drift. And I hope that we will begin to calibrate and readjust our direction. I believe that we have lost our sense of what is important as a people. I believe that too many young people of all races and classes are growing up unable to handle life in hard places, without hope, and without steady compasses to navigate a world that is reinventing itself at an unpredictable pace, both technologically, economically, and politically. My generation learned that to accomplish anything, we had to get off the dime. Your generation as students must learn to get off the paradigm over and over again and to be flexible, quick, and smart about it. But despite all of this dazzling change, I really do believe that there are some enduring values that we adults ought to repeat over and over again to you. And I agree with Archibald MacLeish, who wrote a long time ago that there's only one thing more powerful than learning from experience, and that is not learning from experience. And because I feel strongly that it is the responsibility of every adult, parent, teacher, professional, community, and faith leader to make sure that young people hear what we have learned from the lessons of life that helped us survive and succeed. It is important that adults tell you what we think matters. I had compulsory chapel at Spelman 5 days a week. I rebelled mightily. We had Wednesday evening prayers, and we had Sunday compulsory vespers, and I used to do everything I could to figure out how I could change that. I remember far more, though, the great speakers who came through that compulsory chapel, the Dr. Mazes and the Dr. Kings, and all the great folk of that time who reinforced over and over again that those of us privileged enough to get an education were here to use that education to lift those who had fallen behind and to make sure that we left the world better than we did. And I remembered far more those sermons in chapel than I remembered many of my classes. And the first thing I did when I got to chair the Spelman board was to reinstitute compulsory chapel so that we would have a chance to at least see that freshmen would have a chance to hear what we adults thought was really important. And so I want to just share again a series of letters that I wrote to my own children that then became a book. But I find that they don't get old, and I think they're still the very basic things, and I just really want to share them with the Stanford students. And the first of those lessons is there's no free lunch in life. Don't feel entitled to anything you don't sweat and struggle for, and we've got to help our nation understand that it's not entitled to world leadership based on the past or on what we say rather than how well we perform and meet the growing and changing needs that in this changing world must be responded to. For those who are African American, Latino, Asian American, Native American, and come from all the wonderful diverse backgrounds I've had the privilege of coming into contact with these last few days, I want you to remember that you can never take anything for granted in America, even with a Stanford degree. And you'd better not start now as racial intolerance resurges in our land, but it's wrapped up in many new euphemisms and better etiquette. But as Frederick Douglass warned, it's the same old snake. We've just got to be vigilant again. And if there are graduates who feel entitled to leadership or students by accident of birth, I want to just remind us that the world that we all face and that you face is majority non-white and majority poor, and that if we're going to survive and lead in the new century and be relevant in the new century, we're going to have a global view, and we're going to have to respect the diversity of the world's people. And I've had wonderful time visiting with some of you who have been in the Stanford Study Abroad program, and I just hope that as many of you as possible will participate in getting to know our brothers and sisters around the world. I hope each of us and each of you will struggle to achieve and never think for a moment that you've got it made. Your Stanford degree may get you in the door, but it won't get you to the top of the career ladder, or it won't keep you there. You've got to work your way up hard and continuously, and I know I don't have to remind you, don't ever be lazy. Do your homework, pay attention to detail, check and proof your work. Spell check is really not what you hired to come and proof your work. Poison is not prison. It may be spelled correctly, but it may not always be substantively correct. Please take care continuously and pride in your work. Take the initiative in creating your own opportunity, and don't wait around for other people to discover you or to do you a favor. Don't assume that a door is closed, push on it, and don't assume if it was closed before or yesterday that it's closed today, and don't ever stop learning and improving your mind. And because if you do, you in America are going to be left behind. The only constant is change, and we have to be alert and vigilant and keep growing. There's too many of us who think that we can have our cake and eat it too in our nation, but a people that are unable or unwilling to share, to juggle difficult competing demands, or to make hard choices and sacrifices may be incapable of taking courageous action to rebuild family and community and the future of this nation as we must. Many whites favor racial justice as long as things remain the same. Many voters hate Congress but love their own Congress people as long as he or she takes care of their special interests. Many husbands are happier to share their wives' second income than the housework or child care. Many Americans decry the growing gap between the rich and the poor and middle class and escalating child suffering as long as somebody else's taxes are raised and somebody else's program is cut. We all want to lower the fiscal deficit while still trying to get everything we can. But I again remind us from Frederick Douglass that men may not get all they pay for in this world, but they most certainly pay for all they get. The second lesson for young people, and I've had good conversations at many tables this week, and they're all kind of trying to set plans and set goals, and that's really good in many ways, but then you should begin to set thoughtful goals and to work quietly and systematically toward them. But don't feel you got to talk if you don't have something that matters to say. We should resist quick fix, simplistic answers and easy gains, which often disappear just as quickly as they come. And so many of us talk big and act small. And so often we get bogged down in our own ego needs and lose sight of deeper, other, and collective needs. It's all right to want to feel important if it's not at the expense of doing important things, even if we don't get the credit. And one of the things I learned very early on in my professional career is that you can get a lot achieved in life if you don't mind doing the work and let other people get the credit. But you know what you do, and God knows what you do, and that should all be that matters. Don't have to toot your own horn. Make sure that you just get the work done. The third lesson is to assign yourself. And again, Daddy comes up again. Every day he would ask us whether the teacher gave us any homework. And if we said no, he'd say, well, assign yourself some. Don't wait around for your boss or your friends or your spouse to direct you to do what you are able to figure out and do for yourself. And don't do just as little as you can to get by. Don't be a political bystander and grumbler. Vote. Think about running for office, and school board is one of the most important offices you can run for. And if you do get elected, don't think getting reelected should be your only point in life. If you see a need, don't ask, why doesn't somebody do something? Ask, why don't I do something? Don't wait around to be told to do something. There's nothing more wearing than people who have to be asked or reminded to do things repeatedly. Hard work, initiative, and persistence are still the non-magic carpet to success for most of us. I hope you will internalize those things that my parents made me internalize and that have stood me in good stead. Fourth lesson, I hope you won't ever work just for money. Money alone is not going to save your soul or build a decent family or help you sleep at night. We are the richest nation on earth with the highest incarceration rate, drug addiction, and child poverty rates in the world. Don't ever confuse wealth with fame or fame with character. And don't tolerate or condone moral corruption, whatever its color or class. It is not okay to push or to use drugs, even if everybody you know is doing it. It is not okay to lie or to cheat, even if many corporate and political leaders do so. We must be honest, and we must demand that those who represent us be honest. and never confuse morality with legality. Dr. King once pointed out that everything Hitler did in Nazi Germany was legal. Don't give anyone the proxy for your conscience. I love repeating Robert Kennedy's marvelous an excerpt from Robert Kennedy's speech at the University of Kansas in 1988. When he really looked at the GNP and what it measured and didn't measure, he said, too much and for too long. We seem to have surrendered community excellence and community values to the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product, if we should judge America by that, counts air pollution and cigarette advertising, and ambulances on our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for those who break them. It counts the destruction of our redwoods and the loss of our national wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm and the cost of a nuclear warhead, and armored cars for police who fight riots in the streets. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it tells us everything about America except why we are proud that we are Americans. I hope you will read that over and over again as I try to do. Don't ever give anyone the proxy for your conscience, and let's think deeply about what it means to be an American. Fifth lesson, don't be afraid of taking risks or being criticized. If you don't want to be criticized, don't do or say or be anything. But we won't get to the future that way. And don't be afraid of failing. And all of us tend to be risk averse, but failing is like the scientific method. You experiment until you figure out what makes sense. It doesn't matter how many times you fall. What matters is how many times you get up. And don't wait for everybody to come along to get something done. It's always just a few people who get things done and keep things going. And this country needs more wise and courageous shepherds and fewer sheep who don't borrow from integrity to fund expediency. And I just hope that young people will really take this to heart and not wait around for everybody else, and to really step up to the plate in this very, I think, incredibly important inflection point in history if we seize it and seek to move in a new direction. The sixth lesson quickly is to take parenting and family life seriously, and insist that those you work for and who represent you do so. Our nation mouths family values that we do not practice, and we lag in our policies and our investments behind most other less wealthy industrialized nations. I hope again that we will be able to come together and build the kind of transformative movement that's going to change this. I hope your generation of students will raise your sons to be fair to other people's daughters, and to really make sure that fathers as well as mothers share, not just help, with parenting responsibilities. I hope that you will stress family rituals and be moral examples for your children. If you cut corners, they will too. If you lie, they will too. If you spend all of your money on yourself and tithe no portion of it for Stanford or for your communities or for the poor or civic causes, they won't either. And if you tell snicker at racial and gender jokes, another generation will pass on the poison my generation, or our generations, the many adults here, have not yet had the courage to do enough to snuff out. Seventh lesson is to help America remember that the fellowship of human beings is far more important than the fellowship of race and class and gender in a democratic society. We must be decent and fair and insist that others be so in our presence. We must not tell or laugh or tolerate racial, ethnic, religious, or gender jokes or any practices intended to demean rather than enhance another human being. We must walk away from them. We must stare them down and make them unacceptable in our presence. Through daily moral consciousness, each of us must counter the proliferating voices of racial and ethnic and religious division. that are gaining respectability in too many parts of our land, and I hope that we will face up to, rather than ignore our growing problems, which are America's traditional, the racial problems, which are our historic and future Achilles heel. Just don't let the timetable, the clock go back, and we've got to be vigilant, and we've got to understand that we've got to make sure that we keep moving ahead. And let's not spend a whole lot of useless time penning and denying blame rather than healing our divisions. Rabbi Abraham Heschel correctly said that we are not all equally guilty, but we are all equally responsible for building a decent and a just America and the world. Eighth lesson, don't confuse style for substance or political charm with decency and sound policy. It's wonderful to go to the White House or Congress or State House occasionally for a chat or for a meal, but words alone will not meet children and the poor's needs or the nation's needs. Political leadership, action, and citizen voice and different budget priorities will. I hope we'll all have the courage to speak truth to power and speak truth to those in our own workplaces and pay more attention to what our leaders do more than what they say. Be vigilant, be thoughtful, be constructive, but also raise your voice when you see wrongdoing. Lesson 9, listen for the genuine. And this is one of those sermons I heard in Spelman's Chapel by Howard Thurman, the great black theologian. Went to Morehouse and was chaplain at Boston University for many years. But he talked about how many noises there are in our lives and how it's so hard through all the cacophony of sounds that we get to sort of listen to the sound of the genuine within ourselves. But he reminded that something in every one of us waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourselves. And it is the only true guide you'll ever have. And if you can't hear it, you will all of your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. Small, Einstein said, is the number of them that see with their own eyes and feel with their own hearts. And I hope that each of our young people, and all of us, because I think we're never past transformation, as long as we're alive, I hope we will each try to be one of them. Lesson 10, for young people particularly, never think life is not worth living or that you can't make a difference. Don't ever give up. I don't care how hard it gets, and it will get very hard sometimes, but there's an old proverb that says, when you get to your wit's end, that's where God lives. Harriet Beecher Stowe said that when you get into a tight place and everything goes against you till it seems as though you could not hang on a minute longer, never give up then. For that is just the place and the time that the tide will turn. So hang in with life. Hang in, don't matter how volatile the changes is, how bleak it might look, there's always another chance. Never give up. And don't think you have to win immediately or even at all to make a difference. Sometimes it's very important to lose for things that matter. And don't think you have to be a big dog in order to make a difference. I'm always struck with how we all want to change the whole world, and we all do need to change the world in very fundamental ways. But I'm often reminded of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, two brilliant but illiterate slave women, neither of whom could read, but they, as Sojourner said, I can read people, and Harriet Tubman said that she could read the stars and knew her way to freedom, and had enough sense to go back and bring other people to freedom, and I think that's pretty intelligent. But Sojourner was somebody who long before slavery was ending or thinking about being ended, and they never waited for the Emancipation Proclamation to protest slavery. And she knew, before anybody ever thought about gender equality, she was speaking out against second-class treatment of women. But I have many favorite sojourners, but the one that I keep in mind every day when I'm in Washington, everything is gridlock. But she got heckled by an old white man who stood up while she was making an anti-slavery talk and said to her, old slave woman, don't care any more about your anti-slavery talk than for an old flea bite. And she snapped back at him and said, that's all right, but Lord willing, I'm going to keep you scratching. Many of us really do think we have to be big dogs and that we have to make big differences, and we do need to make big differences. But you know, enough committed fleas biting strategically can make even the biggest dogs uncomfortable and transform even the biggest nation. And we need a mighty flea corps for justice to close that wealth and income gap And everybody's been saying, well, Occupy Wall Street does not have an agenda. Well, they at least have really raised to public consciousness the income and wealth gap, and it's up to us to figure out how we will translate that into a more just America in the frameworks in which we answer. I hope we'll debate and take advantage of this opportunity and turn it into an even greater opportunity to transform America and to begin to raise the issues of poverty and poor education and health care in our rich land. We can do better. Final lesson is not to let anybody else define your lives. Struggle to figure out who you are. You have your own very distinctive DNA. And I hope that you will not let anybody dampen or rain on your dreams. And I quote Shel Silverstein, the children's book writer, very often when he said to listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts, listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts, listen to the never haves, then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. If you dream it, if you believe in it, if you have faith in it, if you struggle in it, struggle for it, and you never give up. Let me just end with the prayer, which I do in most of my speeches, and this is one that's old, but I think still relevant. And I think it's about each of us taking a position that we can each make a difference and each of us can serve. You know, Dr. King used to say you don't have to have a PhD to serve. You can be anybody, but everybody can make a difference. And all of us think we have to be some great personage, but again, look at the need. Figure out how you can make a difference wherever you are, in your family, in your community, in your school, and the choices that you make about how you will spend your volunteer time. So, Lord, I can't preach like Dr. King or turn a poetic phrase like Maya Angelou, but I care, and I'm willing to serve. I don't have Fred Shuttlesworth and Harriet Tubman's courage or Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt's political skills, but I can care. And I'm willing to serve and to work with others to see how we can make our democracy vibrant again. I can't sing like Fannie Lou Hamer or organize like Wyatt Rustin, but I care. And I'm willing to serve and to work with others to stand for children together. Not holy like Archbishop Tutu and can't giggle quite as joyfully as he does, but I'm not forgiving like President Mandela or disciplined like Gandhi. But I care. And I'm willing to serve and to do whatever I can to bring about a transformation in our nations for justice. I'm not brilliant like Dr. Du Bois or Elizabeth Cady Stanton or as eloquent as Sojourner Truth and Booker T. Washington, but I care, and I'm willing to serve and to work with others on my campus and in my community and in my congregation to try to make a difference in moving America in a more positive direction that includes all and not just some. Have not got Mother Teresa's saintliness, Dorothy Day's love, or Cesar Chavez's gentle, tough spirit, but I care, and I'm willing to serve and to do whatever I can to make America a more inclusive society. A lot of us say, and it's true, that God is not as easy as the 60s to frame an issue and forge a solution, but we got to care enough to keep struggling with what is going to be the new theater or what's going to take to translate the needs into solutions in this more complicated globalizing world. Just keep at it until we find out what the way is. And that's why, again, I think this is the time for us to make ourselves felt and to have teach-ins and to really think about where we want to move in the future and what our role can be. So many young people say, I'm so young, nobody will listen, I'm not sure what to say or to do. And that's why we adults and young together, across generation, discipline, and faith, have got to say together, I care, and I'm willing to serve and to do whatever is necessary to make sure that every child has hope and a chance to succeed in the future. Many older people say, I can't see or hear well, speak good English, stutter sometimes, get real scared standing up before others. It's all right, get up, Grandma. And I must say, being a grandmother has radicalized me all over again. And I am determined to do everything I can not to leave this world in a mess for my grandchildren and children. And we all have an obligation to be good ancestors. So we just need to get on up when we have that spurt of energy and say, I care. And I'm willing to serve, and I'm going to make sure that I am a part of this movement to make sure that poverty is ended and children have hope. So I hope as we celebrate this Rathbun legacy and celebrate the extraordinary opportunity that this great university provided us, that we will also ask God to use us. As God wills to save our children today and tomorrow, and to do everything we can in a thoughtful way to build a nation and a world where no child is left behind and every child feels welcome and everyone in our world feels that they are part of a whole and that we can work together for peace and justice. That is what our chore is, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Edelman, for an absolutely magnificent set of lessons for us on how to live a meaningful life and its relationship to the common good. We now have some opportunity for questions from all of you who are here today. There are mics in this row and in that row. I'll be seated in just a moment with Mrs. Edelman and call on you back and forth between left and right. And we have about 15 minutes to do this. So I encourage you to come forward to the mics and have an opportunity for discussion and exchange with Mrs. Edelman.
Everybody seems so shy. Over here to the left. In your experience with the civil rights movements and all your efforts and advancement, what can Occupy movements around the world or Arab Spring revolutions learn from lessons of the civil rights movement?
Well, I think that the major transformation is possible if enough people are ready to sort of get out of their comfort zones and to demand change. I'm an eternal optimist or determinist, whatever you will, but I think if I look back over the last 50 years and what young people, college students, the children who were the frontline civil rights workers, what they were able to achieve in a few short decades, and ordinary people without many resources, that were able to, end legal apartheid because they were just determined to be free. And they were determined to make America closer to being what America professed to be. And so we've seen miracles happen in our lifetime, and I think that the civil rights movement inspired young people. They did study it from around the world, and I'm inspired by them now to see how we can get to that next stage of courage that the Egyptian young people and the Bosnian young people and the Yemenite young people and others. But I think there's something that's going on here. I think we really are struggling to have a new world order that is more just and to close that glaring gap of opportunity for the young and the old and between rich and poor. And so I think this is a special moment. And sometimes, as I've said to some of the students this week, I have this great sense that maybe I may have the chance to experience and be a part of two great transforming movements, the civil rights movement, and we've got to finish that, which is what Dr. King started in the Poor People's Campaign, was a cross-racial movement to end poverty in this country. When he died in 1968, we had 25.5 million poor people and 11 million poor children. Today we've got 46 million poor people, including 16.5 million poor children, and the younger children are, the poorer they are, and we've got almost 7.5 million children living in extreme poverty. It's time to change. You cannot close off the future to this many, and so what is going on here and the kind of Tea Party responses and the Occupy Wall Street responses and what is going on around the world is just this new demand for hope and for a sense of a future. And college graduates, whether they're in Spain or whether they're in Egypt or whether they're here, can't find jobs and they're full of debt. And so I think this is a very special moment, and I think that there are many lessons to be gained from the civil rights movement and from these other movements, but I just hope we will not let this time pass without doing everything we can to move ourselves and the world in a new direction. And I think that it feels right, but it's a lot of hard work. movements are very ragged. They're organic. They're not linear. They come in spurts and go, but we've got to find ways of sustaining it. And the 99.1% is a very good slogan. Now we've got to figure out how we translate that into doing very concrete things that can move us ahead. But they put an agenda out there that's gotten us aware of the unprecedented gap between rich and poor, both in wealth and income. And now I just hope we can transmit that into ending child poverty in this great country and around the world and reordering our priorities. We do not have a money problem still, despite the economic downturn. What we have is a values and a priorities problem, and all of us have got to speak and try to change that.
Mike on the left, please.
Marian, I worked with the Head Start program back in 1965, as of course you did. And we all had high hopes that there would be Head Start preschool programs throughout the country for all children years and years ago. I mean, what are the chances, or what's the hope that one of these days soon we will have preschool programs for children of all levels throughout the country?
We're going to get there. But we're going to have a big movement and make a big noise. We're going to have to raise a ruckus. We've made incremental progress. You know, when we started off in the Head Start program in Mississippi, and Head Start started at $425 million as a part of the poverty program. We've come to have it serve 55% of the eligibles early Head Start, even though we know the science has come a very long way in showing us about early brain development, and yet it reaches only 3% of the eligibles. Our child care block grant took us 20 years after President Nixon vetoed the first perfect comprehensive child development bill, but we got it, and we got to hang on to it. But Head Start's now about $6 billion, and we are now got to make sure that that we integrate and find the way to put together a high quality, integrated early childhood development system, and we got to get the early Head Start people talking to the Head Start people, talking to the child care people, talking to the preschool people, and really looking at families' needs, but we're going to get there. But it's going to take us making noise, and the science now is so clear about the importance of early childhood development and making sure that our children stay in school and don't drop out of school. But again, it's about movement now. We've gone as far as we can go incrementally. We've got to make big noises and demand a reordering of our priorities and putting our money into prevention and not on the back end, in jails and in child welfare systems and juvenile justice system. But that's going to require a movement, and all of us getting out of our comfort zones and being more insistent. We're going to get there. And we're going to get there where we can also say it's not enough to get our children ready for school. We've got to make sure that we have our new education reform goals are K-12, but kindergarten is in existence in only 10 states. We have universal and only 10 states have K. So the first step of this K-12 federal education set of reforms is pretty badly broken. So we've been mounting a full-day kindergarten campaign and trying to say you got to make sure that there's a continuum of care through kindergarten and through schools. And I just want to make another pitch for education today. And for young people to go into it. I kept all of my children out of law school. I think I had something to do about that. But I think that we really need to children desperately need new role models in the classrooms, and I applaud and think we ought to be upping the status of teachers and paying those who do well. But any systems is failing. But we also got to look at the outcomes, and we've got to bring about changes. And there are going to be a number, 3-4 million teacher job openings over the next few years. And I just hope that the people will step up to the plate and understand that this is the sit-in movement and the freedom rider movement of the new era. And because we've got to educate our kids. We cannot have a majority of our children failing and 80% of our minority children failing if we're going to be the majority of our population. And so I think, again, we know a lot. We've made a lot of incremental change. The quality now, the issue is now how do we move it to scale, move it to consistent quality, and then make sure that we have the leadership in these institutions that will be able to carry it forward and sustain it. But I'm confident we will go forward, and if we can reorder our spending priorities and make everybody understand that investment in children is not a choice, it's a necessity. If we want to have a strong labor force, that we can move ahead. So raise your voice. Let's make a big noise.
Mike on the right, please.
First, I want to say, wow. I'm just amazed at your eloquence and really appreciate you being here to share your head and heart. I'm not sure if this is two separate questions. I sort of have stuff bubbling in my head with curiosity of when you said it's a magical time. and also a volatile time, and we've heard about that. So I'd love to have you speak to that, and then if you can somehow weave in what sort of advice you'd give for daily practices to show up with the kind of mindfulness and consciousness and service as you've inspired us to do. So daily, small, tangible things while we're all, aiming for the big stuff.
Well, I guess I'm still in a state of awe that one lived at this moment of a change of century and a change of millennium. And I just somehow think that that makes us have to step up a little even more, and to look backwards and to look forward and to see how we can try to right the world and think about it in new terms of what our children and our need and how can we leave the world better for them. And so when I say magical, I mean the turning of these two things just somehow made me feel that it's a special time. There's just an awful lot that's going on around the world. Much of it is very good. I think we've got to strengthen the voices of women and strengthen the voices of young people. I mean, look at some of the miracles that have happened in our lifetime. And so again, we've got to continue as we deal with all these problems and things that look volatile and horrible. I mean, who would have thought that the Berlin Wall would fall, or that the Soviet Union would have broken up? And who would have thought that Nelson Mandela, which I like to cite all the time, walking out of jail after 27 years, ramrod straight, and apartheid beginning to change, asking for reconciliation with the people who jailed him. I mean, if we think back at the miracles that have occurred, and the miracles of the civil rights movement here and the women's rights movement, not finished yet, and we've got to now put those economic and social underpinnings. Again, I think we should be encouraged, but there's been an awful lot that's been positive, even as we're struggling not to go back and to have the voices of regression gain the upper hand. I find silence the thing that kind of, because there's just so many noises, I just think we just have to find time to be still. And not be in the rat race. I have wonderful meditation guides, and I just also find that being in community with people who are struggling toward a common cause, very, very important. One needs a community of spiritual support. We bought Alice Haley's farm down in Tennessee as a way of training a new generation of leaders and bringing people together across race, class, generation, and faith. And somehow when we walk in those gates, we don't have any stuff there. But what I find is people are so isolated and spiritually lonely that one comes together. I mean, we start our year every year with a women's spiritual retreat. I couldn't make it through the year without that. But I find that being in a spiritual context and seeing fellow strugglers who are making a difference every day but who need renewal is very important. And so having a community of spiritual support. But I think in the absence of all of that, just sit still or go into a monastery or convent for a while, or just go look in your backyard at the gorgeous change of seasons. But I think trying to be alone and not be lonely and to get away from all the noise is just the thing that at least keeps me going.
On the left.
Hello, I'd like to put into context my question. You talked a lot about the value of positivity, and also you mentioned the special giggle of that one archbishop. I was hoping you could comment a little more on just the value of laughter or a smile, because where I come from, those two things are sacred.
Well, there were two things I thought that got us through the civil rights movement. Every night, after everybody had been out and been shot at or tried to register voters, or I'd gone to get somebody out of jail who'd been beaten to a pulp, we would all come back together at 11 or 12 o'clock in the SNCC office or out at Tougaloo College, and we would debrief on the day, and we would laugh like mad about who, and Stokely was one of the funniest ones, about how they'd outrun the plantation owner or outrun the person who shot at them. But we could always laugh. And the second thing is we'd always sing. And somehow music was the thing. We could sing our fears, we could sing our hopes, we could sing our despair. And when the music stopped, the movement stopped. And so one needs to have these communal sharings. I've always been amazed at the joyfulness of many of my very poor friends who really, out of their conviction and their deep, deep belief in God could always laugh. And in fact, whenever you went out in the poor communities, you ended up just laughing all the time. And sometimes I find I have such a serious fun deficit. But fun is not the same as joy. And when you see the Dalai Lama and his mischievous look and his giggle, and you see Desmond Tutu and how he's mischievous, and I see that joy in an awful lot of people who live unthinkable lives in kind of traditional terms. But I think that we need to kind of keep in touch with the music inside, and with the prayer inside, and with the joy that comes from just being alive. And we often tend to forget it in our business.
We have enough time for one more question from the right and one more from the left. We only have one more, that will work.
So in a modern day where hard is not necessarily something that's beneficial, how can you make it applicable to people when you want to instruct them or teach them that struggle or failure or going the long route is better? How do you make that applicable to a generation that quick is a reality and quick is something that is attainable? Because I think in the past where quick was, we didn't have cell phones or the internet, you could get access information instantly, where it is a reality now. How do you teach people or share with people or make it applicable to people that going the long route is okay, and that it is better, and that it can be more beneficial in many ways?
I think I got about 3/4 of what you said, but I think that I'm amazed working with children, and I'm on my way to Los Angeles, at the resiliency and the struggle of young people who most people have given up on, but who somehow find that strength to kind of hold on, and where one person, college students, that gives them a sense of what they can become, or one counselor, or one grandma, or one teacher has turned them around. And my favorite part of our leadership pool are the 700 young people, high school students who've undergone hellish lives, homelessness, violence, abuse, everything, but who somehow have been able to keep struggling and to find their way and to serve others and to do well in school and to go on off to college and to come back, and they are now lawyers and doctors and Peace Corps volunteers. And so I think that, again, trying to expose young people in community to young people who are struggling, is just very, very important. And to take the time to turn off. I'm trying to train myself to just turn off my iPod on weekends and not to look at it, not to sort of feel compelled to have to answer everything in 2 minutes. And you just have to somehow find some space and how to turn off a lot of things. It's just so much noise, but I just think that it's important to kind of get out in community and work with people and to see the grit and the struggle every day. And I think it begins to give you a new little perspective and makes you feel a little less important. And I hope I didn't miss the right 1/3 that you really wanted an answer to. Okay. Thank you.
I want to thank you on behalf of this university for all that you've done for us here. Oh, there is one more? Okay. I promised one more, last one.
Just sort of to follow up on what you just said, what do you think of the idea of having the older generation in kindergartens or in early elementary school to sort of teach the kids? So right now I feel like a lot of parents are really busy, especially in poverty areas, and there are a lot of grandmas or grandpas sitting at home and they help the community, but what if we just put them in schools? Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's terrific. We started a school, 25, 30 years ago, because I don't think you can do good policy if you haven't tried to figure out all the difficulties in implementing that policy. And we'd won a lawsuit to bring children who were very seriously emotionally disturbed we were shipping them from one state to another. The bottom line is that we set up a school for very severely emotionally disturbed children who are in their kind of last chance status. And we put grandmas in the classroom with them and their teachers, and they tested every limit. But I'll tell you that the grandparent presence in those classrooms made such a difference, and their understanding that if they would tear up the school once or twice a year, that nobody was going to give up on them and nobody was going to go away. And it just was a very moving experience. We have one of those educated senior citizen population. And I believe in people keeping active and keeping, I have great 90-year-old role models who are busier than I am and who have great energy and who are engaged daily in trying to reach back. And one of the groups that we are most concerned with and supportive of is all of these grandparents who are raising their grandchildren without adequate supports. And it's very moving, and we're trying to figure out how we can strengthen extended family networks, extend, supports to grandmothers, grandfathers, and aunts and uncles to keep children out of the child welfare system. But it's an enormous resource for the educated grandmothers and parents. But I think that getting them working with young children, and it's good for them. In fact, there's some child care centers that are in nursing homes. And it's good for the folk who are there to be engaged with younger people around them, just as pets are often too a good thing. But I think that however we can build more intergenerational networks, it's going to be terrific. And I would love, as we conceptualize the new schools of the 21st century, we've got to build a lot of new schools that will really truly build schools as intergenerational institutions, and we will co-locate services, whether it's the public libraries and the benefit shops, and mix all kinds of people together so that children and those who are isolated can share their strengths. And there are examples of wonderful things like the Experience Corps and others, but I am for putting as many adults, caring adults, together with children who desperately need attention together, and I hope we can foster that more in our early childhood development centers, but also in our public school classrooms. But thank you for that question.
Amongst the many books that you've written, one of them is called Lanterns. And it's, I think, partly in response to this last question, that the importance of having exemplars, heroes and heroines, older people who have inspired us and can continue to inspire us is absolutely critical. And you have been one of those people for so many of us, literally for a half a century now, and will
Started when I was 5, right?
Longer than half a century. And we are so appreciative of what you've done for our community here at Stanford, for this country, and for the world. And we look forward to a new movement, as you say, that will continue this work and hopefully in the spirit of that lantern, help us to see the light and to live in the light and to act in the light for not only our own personal fulfillment in terms of lives of meaning, but for the common good for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.